All right, everybody, welcome back. You ready to jump into another deep dive today?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Awesome. I'm really excited to talk about this one because, well, it's something that I think could have some serious long-term repercussions,
Yeah.
but might not seem immediately like a huge deal. And it's something that I've been kind of fascinated with for the last few weeks.
Interesting.
So the story we're looking at today is about a recent trip by the foreign ministers of Germany and France
Okay.
to Syria.
Interesting.
And the reason that this is such a big deal is because this is the first official visit from any EU country in over a decade.
Yeah. That really is a fascinating point. And you're right. It might not seem like a big thing on the surface,
Right.
but when you think about the context here, it actually could signal some really major shifts
Yeah.
in the geopolitical landscape.
So, one thing I noticed in the article title that we're looking at is that it specifically mentions that this is the first visit from EU countries.
Right.
Like, it's not just any country, it's specifically EU countries. Why is that distinction important?
Well, I think it goes back to the history of the EU's relationship with Syria, right?
Yep.
Since the beginning of the Syrian civil war, the EU has taken this pretty hard stance against the Assad regime,
Yeah.
right? They've imposed sanctions, they've largely cut off diplomatic relations, and they've really kind of shunned Syria on the world stage.
Right.
And so this visit from these two major EU countries is kind of like a crack in that unified front.
Yeah, it's like they're testing the waters a little bit.
Exactly.
So then that makes me wonder, okay, so what's changed?
Right.
What's prompting Germany and France to re-engage with Syria after all this time?
Well, there are probably a few things at play here.
Okay.
And it's important to remember that we're kind of speculating here because we don't have the official behind the scenes scoop.
Right.
But based on what we know about the situation and kind of the broader geopolitical context, we can make some educated guesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, what are some of the things that might be motivating them to make this trip?
Well, first off, there are some pretty serious humanitarian concerns in Syria.
Yeah.
The civil war has created this massive refugee crisis, and Europe has felt the effects of that, right?
Right.
There are millions of Syrian refugees who fled to Europe, and that's put a strain on resources and led to some pretty tense political debates.
Yep.
So it's possible that Germany and France are looking for ways to address that crisis at its source.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe they're hoping to provide more aid directly to Syria, or maybe they're trying to work with the Syrian government to create conditions that would allow refugees to safely return home.
So that's one potential angle.
Yeah.
The humanitarian one.
Right.
But it still feels like there's got to be more to it, right?
Yeah, I think so too.
Like you said, it's been over a decade,
Yeah.
They've been pretty opposed
Ah.
to Assad, and now all of a sudden they're sending their foreign ministers.
Exactly. And, one thing to consider is that Syria, despite all the devastation of the war, has this potential
Yeah.
for reconstruction, right?
Right.
And I think Germany and France, they're major economic powers, they might be looking at this and saying, hey, there's going to be a lot of money flowing into Syria to rebuild it, and we want to be a part of that.
Yeah, so that's interesting, like an economic play.
Right, exactly. And it makes sense, right? They want to secure contracts for their companies
Yeah.
to be involved in rebuilding infrastructure, things
Yeah.
like that.
Okay, so we've got the humanitarian aspect, the economic aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other big reasons why they might be making this move?
Well, we can't forget about counterterrorism.
Right.
Syria has become, unfortunately, a hub for extremist groups,
Yeah.
and that's a major security threat for Europe, right?
Yeah.
So it's possible that Germany and France see this re-engagement with Syria as a necessary evil, They might be thinking that they need to cooperate with the Syrian government, to some extent, in order to effectively combat terrorism.
So even if they're not thrilled about Assad being in power,
Right.
they recognize that they at least have some sort of working relationship.
Exactly. It's about prioritizing those security concerns over, maybe some of those moral objections.
Yeah. Okay, so that's another big piece of this puzzle.
It is.
And, as we're talking about all of this, I can't help but think about the geopolitical implications of this visit.
Right. Me too.
Like, for years, Russia has been the main power broker in Syria, right?
Absolutely.
They've been propping up the Assad regime. They've been militarily involved.
Yeah.
So what does it mean for them that Germany and France are now trying to get back in the game?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's hard to say for sure how Russia's going to react to this EU overture
Right.
On one hand, they could see it as a direct challenge to their influence in Syria,
Uh-huh.
and they might try to push back against it.
Right.
But on the other hand, Russia's also facing its own challenges, right?
Yeah.
They're dealing with the war in Ukraine, they've got economic problems.
Yep.
So they might actually welcome some help from the EU in stabilizing Syria.
Okay.
It's possible they might see it as an opportunity to share some of the burden.
Yeah, so it's really hard to predict
Yeah,
how this is all going to play out.
it is.
But it definitely adds another layer of complexity to the situation.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating to watch, right?
Yeah.
You have these different actors, all with their own interests,
Right.
their own motivations,
Yeah.
and they're all kind of jockeying for position in
Yeah.
this really volatile and unpredictable environment.
So, I mean, just to kind of recap everything, it seems like we've got this really complex web of factors at play here.
Definitely.
We've got humanitarian concerns, economic interests, counterterrorism efforts, and this whole geopolitical power struggle between Russia and the EU.
Absolutely.
It's a lot to unpack. But I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that this seemingly small event, this one diplomatic visit, actually has the potential to have some really significant ripple effects.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like a butterfly flapping its wings, you know? It could set off a chain reaction that changes the whole landscape of the Syrian conflict and the broader Middle East.
It could, and I think that's why it's so important for us to be paying attention to these developments,
Right.
even if they seem minor at first glance.
Exactly. And, as we wrap up here, I want to leave our listeners with this thought.
Yeah.
What do you think the EU's next move should be?
That's a great question. And it's one that I'm not sure anyone has a clear answer to right now,
Right.
but I think it's a question that we should all be thinking about.
Yeah, I think so too. And, as things unfold in Syria, we're going to be here to break it all down for you.
Absolutely. We'll keep you updated.
So make sure you tune in next time for another deep dive.
Yeah. We'll see them.
See you later.